Welcome to the Impulse Spotlight, a podcast for product development professionals. In this episode, we meet with former Senior Director of Engineering at Fortune Brands Innovations, a company whose portfolio of brands includes Aqualisa, Emtek, Therma-Tru, Fiberon, Masterlock, and SentrySafe. Our guest has over 3 decades of experience in developing new products, generating value, and overseeing multi-million-dollar facilities and equipment upgrades across various industries. Outside of his professional life, he enjoys fishing, particularly traveling to coastal destinations and targeting new species to catch. Scott Losik was born and raised just outside of Detroit, Michigan. He obtained his degree in mechanical engineering from Michigan State University and kicked off his career at Ford Motor Company and eventually earned a master's degree in automotive engineering from the University of Michigan. At Ford's engine lab in Dearborn, Scott specialized in engine testing and played a pivotal role in establishing new test facilities and capabilities, handling everything from testing methodologies to strategic planning and project management. Scott's expertise eventually led him to Fortune Brands, where he initially focused on faucets before expanding into building products like doors and decking. In our discussion, we learned about the product development project that Scott spearheaded called the Hybrid Valve. This innovative product platform simplified over 50 bath faucet configurations into just 5 valve assemblies that can be repeated across multiple products. We explore the challenges of developing a product platform, the importance of collaborating with marketing and design teams to isolate key requirements, and the value of understanding customer needs. Scott shares his insights into the benefits of platforming and the impact it has on a business. And we discuss the potential role of AI in product development for concept design and marketing insight. Scott provides a unique perspective on product development, speaking from a project leadership perspective and analyzing how small decisions up front have large impacts with a team down the line. Let's get into it. Hey, Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Troy. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to our conversation.
I'm glad you're here. So I started Impulse a little over 25, actually almost 26 years ago. I worked for a product design company. They had everything under one roof. I tell everybody I got my master's degree in product development working there. Saw the writing on the wall after several years that they were not going to be in it for the long haul, so I started Impulse, and that's kind of how I got into product development. So how did you get into product development?
Well, I started actually, it was right out of college. I graduated from Michigan State. I guess we'll start there with an engineering degree, mechanical engineering degree. And I was in the Detroit area. So like so many others, I went directly into the automotive industry. So my first job was at Ford. And incidentally, I didn't start actually in product development per se. I actually started in a mix of testing and facilities. So I had a job where I was a test engineer, which the majority of that job was actually like implementing new test facilities. I did some testing, for requesters and engineers at the time, which was kind of boring at the time. I was really just running a test and writing a report, but we actually put in new test facilities. And so that's where I got kind of introduced into product development. Was all the engineers I worked with were actually working on product development. So over time, I moved into various other roles at Ford over the years, which included other testing roles and design roles and so forth. So over the course of many years, I gained experience there at Ford in testing, design, even in the strategy department, in project management as well. So I got quite a bit of experience over the years working at Ford. And that diverse background actually led me into future roles, which when I left Ford, I worked for a supplier doing some design work, and then eventually I went. My last company I worked for was called Fortune Brands Innovations. So I moved completely out of the automotive industry into consumer goods and building. I did both consumer goods and building products. So what's been interesting, I guess, in my career is I've had a chance to take, some of that like hardcore automotive engineering experience, if you will. If you're familiar with automotive, it's very structured and very process oriented, and move it into some of these other industries. So like consumer goods and building products. So like that was, I think, very good training ground for me to take some of that, process and rigor and put some of that into these other industries. Incidentally, a lot, they're some of the other industries, they're very, kind of loose on their engineering, and they don't follow like structured process. Not that they need to go as far as automotive. I mean, that was the balancing act I had to play as I moved into other industries. You can't just go hardcore automotive in some of these consumer goods companies because, they're just not, the product's not really suitable for it. So it's just been a really interesting journey. And I've spanned like I said, multiple industries, and then also, just a variety of products. I've worked on, when I was in automotive, I worked on engines, I worked in chassis. When I moved into consumer goods and building products, so at Fortune Brands, I worked on faucets, then I worked on what they called their outdoors portfolio, which was like doors and decking products. So just been a real interesting, breadth of different products I've worked on over the years.
Very interesting. And what about the product you want to talk about today? What is it, and why did you choose that one?
Yeah, so what I chose today, it's back when I worked on faucets at what was the Moen brand for Fortune Brands. It was back in the 2015-16 timeframe. We developed what we call the hybrid valve. So if you think about the valve structure being sort of the chassis for a faucet, so it's sort of what you see we call it under deck or under the counter. So it's the stuff that you don't see when you're looking at a faucet, but it's analogous to the chassis on an automobile. If you think about product platforms in automobiles, right? So the automotive companies develop these standardized platforms, so standardized chassis, with the same brakes and suspension and so forth. Because in the end, the customer can't see it; they just want it to perform, right? So really,
Right.
it enables the company to like develop products faster because they don't have to redesign, chassis and wheels and brakes and suspensions all for every product. And prior to starting this hybrid valve project within Moen, and that's actually how I got hired in because of my automotive experience. I got hired in and actually started what they called the platforms engineering group. There I was one of two people that built into over time like a 20-person team. We took that experience, a couple of us from other industries, and brought in and looked at, okay, we need to develop some product platforms that are more standardized. The hybrid valve started off with what they call their two-handle center set, which is if you think of the small bath faucet that you see with two handles in your bathroom, they had, believe it or not, like just an immense amount of variation within their product portfolio. So the valve understructure under that faucet, they had over 53 different combinations at the time, which seems almost overwhelming for something that's a standardized size. So you can just imagine these things are developed over the course of, a couple of decades. And really it's if you think about it, it's just designing every one sort of in a box almost, or thinking of them individually. So each one was designed and optimized for that specific project versus thinking about the portfolio as a whole. So we had to really take a step back and look at the portfolio and say, okay, well, what do we need to do to really get this down to a portfolio that makes sense, that we can develop derivative products off of, that we don't have to have all this variation or redo all the valve work. Because you think the valve is a pressure vessel, so there's a validation process that happens every time, and you're redoing this every time. So that adds a lot of time and money and retooling every time. So long story short, we decided we're going to develop kind of a good, better, best platform, try to get this down to just a couple of valves that we can build products off of. And the hybrid valve at the time is what we called the project. We developed sort of a good, better, best product strategy, and I can walk through kind of the details on each one of those.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear the details, but just to clarify, you said you went from was it 54 different valves?
53 different valves. We got it down to, in the end, to about, it all said and done, there was about 5 different configurations. So we did sort of the good, better, best, and there was a couple other configurations that we had to have for some specialty products. But it just was a tremendous amount of reduction in variation. You can imagine the impact on manufacturing and sourcing and the rest of the company over time. It just was a tremendous value of the company.
Sure. Yeah. Can you give us some more detail about the products? I mean, and from an ignorant standpoint, why couldn't you just have one valve that did everything? What were the reasons for having to end up with, I think you said 5?
So we called it, so we're trying to develop like a good, better, best strategy. So the majority of the valves in the faucet industry at the time were all complete brass valves. So like brass was king, and everything was made out of brass, either forged or machine parts or a combination of the two.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some nuances between each one of the valves for every product, because you had differences in handle sizes and dimensions on the faucets. So they did some nuances, and they went to different suppliers because they were trying to get a better price on one versus the other. So every supplier would design it a little bit. You've been in the industry a long time. If you take the same design and move from one supplier to another, they're going to make changes because their manufacturing process is different. So for example, if I'm doing a cast valve versus a forged valve versus a cast and machine, the product itself is going to look different because the process they use, even though it's the same, it's not really the same. So and they just all this variation over time they had done with all these different vendors and all these different products. And they had some specialty products as well that were, dimensioned differently. They had to do specialized valves. So, I mean, it was just amazing when you dig into the details, just the amount of variation you saw. So what we did is we wanted to develop sort of a good, better, best strategy, right? So at the time, they were struggling in the retail industry to maintain their margins, right? So some of the competitors had already started moving towards more use of composite and plastic materials in their faucets and the underbody. So we said, okay, well, we need to develop, a new valve with some use of plastic, at least for our goods segment, where we can go into retail like the Home Depots and Lowe's of the world. And so we developed sort of the low end was we developed a combination of hybrid, we call it hybrid because it was plastic and brass or composite and brass. And that initial product was actually, instead of a solid brass valve, it was actually an insert molded. We had sort of two brass legs. If you think about the legs as the pieces that hang down that you connect your water lines to. And then the part that fits up underneath the faucet that holds the cartridges is actually, a composite material that we did at the time. So we had to develop, we actually had to develop some customized materials and work with a couple of different vendors on this insert molding process. So those are some of the challenges because, Moen being a company that, quality was still very, very important to the company. So we still had a rigorous test requirements that we still had to meet. So, that's where the challenges lied in this project was developing the right plastic material and still being able to meet all of the, consumer requirements and be able to hold our quality steady, throughout the project.
Interesting. You kind of mentioned you had to come up with a custom material. I mean, were there any other novel technologies or materials or even methodologies that you guys discovered developing the product?
I think no, it's just insert molding at the time was new to me. I wouldn't say that's nothing new to it's been around for a long time. But me personally, that was kind of exciting with the project because at the time I'd never, I'd been introduced to all the forging and machining and casting throughout my career. I'd seen all those processes, so this was interesting. We had worked with actually it was a vendor in China we were working with who's doing the project for us. So I took a trip out there with, a couple of us took a trip out there, the sourcing person, myself, and another one of the engineering managers at the time. And we worked with, when they were doing sort of the development of the product, we went out there for like a week. We got to see what they were doing. And there was a lot of, we do a little bit of tweaks to the process. We actually did some mold flow analysis. They started off with some mold flow analysis to try to get us to the right parameters, but we still had to, we did some testing on site to looking at one of the critical parameters at the time was, because if you're putting on a line if you're putting on your water line, you're applying torque to the I call the legs coming down, right? So one of the issues we had was it was cracking the upper body of the valve, right? So we had torque crack. We still wanted to make sure that people were going to put these in and crack the valves every time they put them in. So we had some strength issues we had to work through. But we were able to kind of optimize that through process once we had the right material. And we actually did that work kind of live. We did, like I said, we did a mold flow to kind of get the first basis for our work. And then we did several iterations over the course of the week, and we kind of did live testing there. So that was one of the things I remember most about that that initial project is going there, kind of working hand in hand with, one of our other, it was actually at the time, it was the engineering manager for the retail business unit. I was in the platforms group, but we were equivalents, but we were working kind of hand in hand along with the sourcing person as well and the vendor. So it was a good collaboration at the time. And those are, to me, are some of the memorable moments when you're working in product development, when you get like a group of people working together, kind of solve a problem.
Yeah. That's interesting. Insert molding can be a little bit of a challenge to dial in sometimes, but it sounds like you guys got it dialed in pretty quick, like in that time that you were there during that week.
In the time we were there, like I said, though, they did a little pre-work and they did, some mold flow analysis to try to get the starting parameters. So they did some pre-work. So I don't want you to think we did everything in a week right there. The vendor themselves did sort of some pre-work and they thought they were, say 80, 90% there. And
Okay.
then we went there and kind of finished it out. So I don't want to like oversell to say that we did some
Sure.
miracle in a week, but it was a few weeks worth of work, but they did pretty good. I mean, the team there was, was really good. The vendor we worked with over, and it was Xiamen, China that we worked at the time.
Okay. So you mentioned kind of tweaking the material. Did you change the material while you were there, or was it adding
No,
more?
no, no, we changed the material through analysis. So we did FEA analysis and determined the right material. So we did that through the pre-work.
Okay. So before the tool was made, I was going
Before
to
the
ask
tool was
how you
made,
handled the shrink differences and things like that, but
yeah,
you
we
didn't have
did a
to.
lot of analysis up front, and we handled the major, that was handled through looking at, okay, what are the strength requirements of material, and we were able to, luckily, we're able to dial in through FEA analysis versus trial and error, because that, as you know, that can be quite expensive
Sure.
as well. Because to your point, like if you pick two different materials, you can't use the same mold because shrink rates are different than your dimensions are off and all that. So,
Right.
although you can tweak you can tweak the dimensions a little bit, as you probably know, with the parameters on the machinery route. And you have temperature and pressure, it changes dimensions slightly, but if you're way off, you're not going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So we've literally helped develop thousands of products, and every one of those journeys is a little bit different. So kind of walk us through the journey of developing this. What were the steps involved?
Oh yeah, sure. I think like most, that's a standard process. You develop, you list out kind of the requirements, you develop concepts, and then you develop prototypes, and eventually you're finalizing a design, you're kicking off tools, which is kind of standard. But I think what's different about this, I think to highlight different from like most products, because we're doing like a product platform that we plan to like build all these derivative products on.
Hmm.
Probably the most challenging piece for this was sort of the upfront work, right? I'll call it the analysis. Really had to identify, okay, what are all the future, kind of like thinking about the future, what are the different products we want to develop on this platform? So we had to future in those future designs in this product. So that's different than you would normally do with like just developing a product for a group of customers. You're actually trying to future in. So for example, I'll give you an example. Okay, what are all the different handle lengths and weights and so forth that you think you're going to need on future faucets for this, right? Because we had requirements around the torque you put on a handle, also a cyclic fatigue requirement. So if I put I'm making this up, a 4-inch handle versus a 2-inch handle, well, those, as you know, the torque is much different on the cartridge and on the
Sure.
valve itself as well, right? So we had to really get agreement, because you had to put some box around it, right? Because you're going to get to the point where um, you can't just design it so I can have a 22-inch handle. I'm exaggerating, of course, because then you'd way over design the product, it would be over costed, and it wouldn't be a good platform to build on, right? So you had to like be reasonable with the marketing folks. And so, those are kind of the challenges. And you know this through product development. Some of the biggest challenges are like the collaboration with the folks that you're working with, not necessarily the design of the product itself, which is a challenge quite often, but working with the folks that are futuring the products and are thinking about what the future products look like, right? And getting alignment on, okay, well, what is where do we think we're going? Because nobody has a crystal ball, so a lot of that's guesswork. So it's getting alignment on, hey, here's where I'm going to put my box, and here's how I'm going to design it. In the end, once you develop a platform, I mean, the whole beauty of it is you get down to this handful of valves, and then later on you can just redesign it. So then you have one thing to redesign versus 20 or 30 or 40,
Right.
right? So in the end, it's a much better place to be for a company than just endless amounts of variation.
So if you did kind of miss on the futuristic part and you did need a 22-inch long handle, you could redesign it and just make it strong enough
We
and move
we
on.
we could redesign it, or we could design a one-off if we really, or another platform if we really thought that was something that's going to be a future trend, right? So um, the what we always used to say about platforming, Troy, is that what you want to do is you want to eliminate useless variation and keep useful variation, right? So we just keep the variation that we need in order to satisfy the customer, and anything above and beyond that is waste, right? So
Right.
we don't unnecessary. If you think about developing a product, the most efficient way to develop products is to change as little as possible. And as engineers, we don't think that way always, right? We think we want to just redesign something from scratch every time. But as business people, the goal is to redesign as little as possible because A, you spend a lot less money, B, you spend a lot less time, and C, you have a lot less propensity to have issues with quality and so forth, right? If you're changing less. Go back to the automobile analogy, right? So like if I can just refresh, you see they just refresh the front fascia and maybe put some new seats in and a new interior. Well, that's a heck of a lot, cheaper and more efficient and faster than doing a complete new chassis, right? So,
Sure.
and if it satisfied the customer, then what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that because in the end, we're trying to sell products that people want and they want to buy and make the companies money. And, again, as engineers, I think we're natural tinkerers. We want to change things. We want to dig in and just make everything better as well. One of the old sayings that, we used to use in the industry, don't let perfect get in the way of good, right? Because sometimes, good is good enough to make money and to sell the product. And, myself, I'm a perfectionist at times as well. So, right. So it's kind of hard to weigh that between, perfection and what's good enough.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting. You were saying that about you want to change as little as possible. I'll probably offend somebody, but I'm a fan of Tesla, and they just refreshed the Model 3 in the last, I think, 6 months or so. And all they did was maybe change the bumper, change the
Right.
rear end. I mean, it was very little change, and there's kind of a new car now. They did some interior work and things like that too, but like you said, the platform is all the same.
Right.
So interesting.
The old thing, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So like if you got something that's working well, I mean, the reason to change something is because it's not working or the customer wants something different, right?
Hmm.
Um, or you're trying to do something different to try to gain new business, something that nobody else has, right? That's when you get into the innovation space, right? When you're trying to develop something that's not out there at all versus like if you think about product development, a vast majority of product development is like we like to talk a lot about innovation. That's really cool and sexy, but a large part of product development are these refreshes and things like that, where you're refreshing products that are already out there. And if you think about the way a company operates, we want to spend as little time as possible doing that and as much time as, spend more efforts on the innovation. So how can we take our resources off refreshing, make that go very efficiently, and just make that sort of very easy and very iterative, and then focus our high power onto the innovation space, which may only be 10% of what we're doing. But if I can put a bigger effort on that, then I can innovate more and spend less time doing all these kind of product refreshes and line extensions, whatever term you want to use. Every company uses a different,
Sure.
terminology, but those are your kind of your bread and butter of, the companies do it. Particularly, I've worked with bigger companies, but I mean, obviously smaller companies are doing innovative products, but I mean, this is sort of your normal product development.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the timeline like to develop the whole platform, I guess?
Once we got kind of the requirements all nailed down on that portion, so I'll leave that up for when we can talk about that. But I think it was about an 18-month kind of time frame,
Okay.
to develop that. We had a lot, like I said, we had a lot of that upfront work to like kind of hone in on, what are the future requirements and all that. There was a lot of pre-work, that took, 6 months to a year ahead of that. So, if you wanted to look at the whole thing, maybe you're looking at 2.5 years if you all that pre-work. But then here's the interesting thing, Troy, is once that was in place, then you had one platform, and again, we're just talking about the good platform. We did like a better best, but I think this is good. The same process held true for the other ones. But once we had that in place, and this was focused on the retail products, like I mentioned before, right? And retail's like they really like to refresh their products very often, right? So in the past, when we did like a new valve, you're looking at like an 18-month project for retail, which that was too slow for the Home Depots and Lowe's of the world. But we got that down in the nowadays they're doing that in like 6 months or less,
Oh, wow.
even less in some cases. So I mean, we cut it down like to like 1/3 of what it was. And I'm talking about if you did a whole new valve and everything. But I mean, it really changed the way they thought. It also made it easier because um, the design review process we used was much more rigorous for something where you're doing a lot of change because you have to have a lot more eyes on it and a lot more you got to be a lot more detail oriented, put a lot more rigor into it. But if you've already got a platform that works and it's tested and validated, really then you just get so that you're just changing the components that the customer sees. You're just changing handles and spouts, And as long as
Right.
you stay within the design envelope, because we developed what we call design interfaces, right? So there's a design interface guide. As long as you follow these guidelines, so that my handle, for example, is this long and this high and weighs this much or less, then you're within the envelope. Then we've already validated the design. You're good to go. You don't need to do any testing. You basically go from artist conception or from the industrial designs conception to right into production.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, they've evolved so much, and this is back in the 2016 timeframe. They've evolved so much where they're actually working with one of their vendor partners who makes handles and spouts, and they're actually able to send the designs right to the vendor, like from the ID, and they just skip over the whole internal. They go right to the vendor, and they just tool it up, and they're ready to launch it. So I mean, that's how it's streamlined. It's become. Whereas in the past, it was a much longer, more complicated process. So I mean, as we're talking, you probably really get a sense of how that really transformed the business. So I wanted to talk about this product again. The valve itself, it's not insert molded. I mean, these are things that are the processes in that aren't that exciting, but it's the way it transformed the business and allowed them to be much more streamlined and productive over the last 7-8 years.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty awesome. Are they still using the same platform as far as you know?
Yeah, as far as I know, yes. And I know they are. Yes. I mean, if you went to like a Home Depot or a Lowe's and bought like a Moen faucet, you'd be looking at this.
Interesting. Tell us about the team that was involved. And you can do the whole thing. I know you mentioned marketing up front, but what did the team look like to get this created?
For sure, it's actually a pretty compact team when we started. So I think I mentioned earlier, like I started when they hired me, and it was myself and one other person started the team, the platform group that they call the Platform Engineering Group. But that team grew over time to about 20 people. But just for this specific project, it was myself. I had a project manager that was reporting to me directly on the project, and then we had a couple of engineers. So we had a team of like 4 or 5 people that specifically on this one valve. And then I mentioned there was a couple other, like a better best valve, but we had a small team on those two. So you're talking about a small team of just a couple of folks. Now, there was obviously collaboration with the other business, within the business. There's collaboration with the other groups I mentioned earlier. Like for example, there was a manager of engineering with the retail business unit. So for this one, which was really focused on the retail business unit, like we're working very closely with him and one of his engineers. So it wasn't just all self-contained. It was we were driving the work, but they were also partnering with them to do some of the work as well. So all in all, just technical folks. You had a team of less than 7 or 8 people, and
Wow.
then I mentioned collaboration with a vendor, and then with of course sourcing and marketing as well to help with requirements and making sure that we're meeting their expectations and so forth.
Sure. Did you, little side question, they brought you in for this project, so they had already identified that, hey, we want to platform these valves?
They wanted to platform their products, and so we picked that one. That after I came in, we did. So if you think again about platforming, the first step, and we actually developed the whole process for her platforming. There was like 4 phases. So there was, and I'll just maybe highlight this real quickly. So the first phase is analyze. So you analyze your product portfolio and figure out where all the variation is. And the next phase was what we called stabilize and standardize. So so then that gets into like, okay, well, where is unneeded variation? So there's some things we did just to eliminate some products that were like super low volume we weren't selling. So we just kind of eliminated and got rid of them. And then we also looked at things that weren't performing well. So like, where do we have quality issues? So you want to look at those type of things. You're doing the analysis. Then the third phase is optimize. So then, okay, now we're going to optimize and develop a platform. That was kind of this project where we're going to optimize a platform that we can use going forward. And then the last phase is innovate. And that's after you get the platform all in place. And that's what I mentioned earlier. But now I have a single platform in place. Now I can innovate off that platform, and I can evolve, and I can change it in, it's sort of a combination of optimizing and innovate. But now I can evolve off of that, right? So
Yeah.
how it started again was I came in, we looked at, and I took the 2-handle because the 2-handle product portfolio at the time was very complicated. We started there. There was another guy working there with me. We did hand in hand. He was working on the 1-handle kitchen faucets, so he was doing similar stuff there. So we you working hand in hand. We worked together on kind of a couple different platform opportunities. So they started with 2-handle and 1-handle kitchen platforms to try to start their platforms there, and they've evolved over the last 8 years. That group grew, and I had that group for a while. Then I left and took a different role, but that group is still in place, and someone else took my position, and that group is still strong, like guiding the platforms as they move forward in the future.
Very interesting. You've mentioned several things, and then the ultimate success and savings from a business standpoint of the product. But what were some of the key milestones and achievements that were reached during the development?
Yeah, I mean, one of the, I guess, obviously a business, cost was, as you can probably, I'm alluding to it, right? So you got an all brass valve, you're using like a hybrid valve that's use of composite, even though it was like a specialized composite, we still saved, I think it was somewhere, and I'm going to quote it, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10% on the COGS for, for a retail, for a low end retail faucet, kind of our entry level retail faucet. So it was pretty significant at the time, because they were uncompetitive with because the market, they were uncompetitive with some of the competition from a cost standpoint. So this helped them to achieve better margins and develop products faster. So I think that was one of the big successes. I guess the other milestone for me, I mentioned it, but I think when we did our first shots runoff, when we got the valve working at the vendor in China, that was this huge milestone, because that was sort of, okay, now we got this thing where it's working right, and we've got over some of the issues we had, and it's like, okay, now it's full steam ahead. We need to get this thing in production and move forward. So those kind of, if I think of those things, meeting the cost targets and getting this, the design for manufacturing all worked out, we're able to make this on site at the vendor, were kind of two of the things that in my mind stick out as sort of the most important things for the business at the time.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned the cost of goods dropped. Was that because the volumes went up, so you were able to get some cost savings because of high volume, or was it insert mold design, or?
It's two things. It's the material cost itself was lower, but then now we're developing because you're going from all brass to a use of composite and brass.
Okay.
So we reduced the brass content by 50 to 75%, right? But we still have brass in it, but now we have all this use of, even though it was a specialized plastic composite material, it's still, like, cost per pound is way less than brass. So the cost of the valve itself was less, but also as you could probably, as you're alluding to, like, now we have a higher volume we can put this on, because we're not spreading it over all these. That happened over time, but we made more and more of these. So then sourcing was able to develop leverage this high volume and get a little bit better pricing and work out some negotiations with the vendor who was supplying it. So I think you care to get the best of both worlds there. It's awesome. Interesting. I think an interesting point here, Troy, to make is that when you develop a product by itself without looking at the whole platform, you can sometimes optimize the cost for that one product. But then moving forward, if you keep doing that over and over and over again, next thing you know, your portfolio is not optimized. So it's a nuance that I think a lot of people don't understand. Like because a project team, if you're marketing, all you want to do is you want that product to be the right cost at the right time and so forth. But they're not looking at the whole portfolio of the whole business. So like our view was looking at the whole business as a whole, right? So any one project, there were some projects that actually cost more, but as a portfolio as a whole, it saved the company a ton of money, right? Mm-hmm. So I think of it in those terms, right? Because they might have negotiated for this one project, I'm getting a really good cost for this one valve and this one product I'm doing, but I'm not looking at the big picture. So in the end, the company as a whole wants to save money, even if that project and that particular customer might be paying a little bit more. That's a nuance that I think a lot of people wouldn't catch unless you kind of work through this and really seen the math work out in your own with your own two eyes.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you've reduced all this cost and all this, and you've taken out all this time, but a few projects or a few products suffer, for lack of a better term. They get more expensive just because now they've got to get pulled into that platform. That you wouldn't think that's something that would happen, but I guess that makes sense.
Well, I mean, the other thing that another nuance here, I'm getting really into the weeds, but that's good because we're technical guys, and there's sometimes sourcing negotiates a really good price on something, and they keep the product around for a long time. So you get legacy pricing that doesn't get updated, right? So if you think about, okay, I'm just going to keep the same product going on and on and on and on, and we had a lot of issues with this, right? So you can think about some of our faucets have been around for a very long time. So then it becomes near impossible to refresh the faucet because it's been around for a long time, because I've got all this legacy price, and they're saying, well, no, you got to hold the price, you got to hold the price. But then the vendor just increases the price on the new products to make up for it, right? So it's, if I'm a vendor, right, and I've been worked for a vendor too, so that's how they do it, right? Is I got this product that's sort of a loser, but I'm making up for it with these other products. Well, really what I want to do is level the playing field so that all of our products are competitive, even though you might lose on this one that you've had legacy pricing on for a very long time, even though, but what's hard to understand is the design itself might have been more expensive, but the price you're paying for it was less because you'd held on to the same pricing for the last 10 years.
Right, right. Very interesting. With all the products we've designed, there's always some kind of big challenge that comes up, and I know you've mentioned several, but what was the biggest challenge you and your team faced developing this?
I think I'm going to go back to like getting alignment with the marketing folks and the product teams on what this product needed to encompass over time, right? Like I said, what developing sort of the interfaces and the envelope that we're going to work within, right? So that sort of was the foundation of building this, because without that we can't move forward, right? So it's getting the right, okay, well, what handle lengths do I need, and what's what are the parameters that I need to work within so that I can actually validate the product. I think that was probably the biggest challenge, because once, like a lot of when I think about product development for me personally, like I personally think one of the hardest things to nail down is requirements, because I think as engineers, once you have good requirements, engineers can develop a product. If you've got rock solid requirements, you can develop. Any engineers are smart. We can develop products if we have good requirements. Easier said than done, though, right, Troy? Because sometimes you don't know what the requirements are, so you got to take a leap of faith and you got to agree on requirements. And you get into these scope creep and things like that as you work on projects that have for many years, right? You get into scope creep, and that's what makes projects last so long. Or like that's where we fail projects is the scope creeps, and it's like, well, what I designed it to do one thing, and now you want it to do another thing. Now I've got to redesign it, and so forth and so on, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to downplay how easy that is, because it's not easy. I think developing requirements is very difficult. And one of the things that I really pushed for with my teams over the years was, how do we turn like marketing requirements into engineering requirements? That's another kind of nuance to this, right? So marketing requirement is I'll make up a faucet example. So we talk about faucet. I want good handle feel. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, we need something measurable, right? So I need what are the efforts I need? Okay, so I want light. So okay, well, I want light effort. So what does light effort mean? Well, we got to take some measurements, and okay, is this light enough? No. Is this light enough? Right. So we have to do experiments and work with the marketing folks and say, okay, well, this is what I like. And sometimes you have to bring in focus groups and get their opinion. Oh, do you like this? Do you like that? So those,
Sure.
I think, can be the most challenging parts of product development. But once that's nailed down, you tell an engineer, I need a cartridge that has this handle feel, and you give them a curve, a force effort curve. They'll figure it out. They'll figure out a way to get there, right? Because you have something tangible to work towards.
Sure. Uh, with regards to that interaction with upfront, I assume there was a lot of education you had to bring like to marketing. Marketing people aren't thinking platform wise, right? And they just want every handle possible. And
It's kind of talking just like we are, like, hey, wait a minute, trying to explain that, hey, I can't design a good handle feel. So, over the years it's been, well, just make me another like a lot of the marketing folks want to just make me another prototype and I'll tell you when I like it. Right.
yeah,
But that becomes very, I get it, in the agile world that we live in today, like there's a big mindset to like just create more prototypes and prototypes. And there's a space for that too, don't get me wrong. But I think if you can, I found if you can do some experiments and nail some of these things down ahead of time, it will save a lot of prototyping over time, right? So versus just making up 25 prototypes, I can make up put in a solenoid with a cylinder that I can vary the pressure on and change the effort on the handle, and I can say, what do you like, right? And then once I nail that down, well, then now I can make a real prototype to do that.
sure.
So there's ways to trick that, if you will, that we can do those ahead of time that I think can save a lot of time and money.
Yeah, that's interesting. Shifting gears just a little bit before we wrap up, what are some of the trends that you see emerging in product development today?
I think by far the biggest one I think that's going to impact product development is AI and the use of AI in product development. I think we're obviously in the infancy stages, but I think there's we're going to be using it across the whole life cycle. I think we're going to be using it to generate concepts, get marketing insights. I see it being used in we'll be using it in simulation work. Um, Maybe testing, automation. I mean, there's just so many different ways we could use AI. I think it's going to change the whole industry. Again, we're just in the infancy. I mean, there may be a day when we're completely designing products using AI. I don't know, but I mean, I could. That's not inconceivable in my mind. But again, I think
Sure.
it's going to change the game for sure.
Yeah, I can see. I think we're a ways away from AI completely eliminating the need for people designing product, but
Oh yeah, for sure. But I mean, it's not
no, right.
inconceivable that 20 years from now or 10 years, I don't know what the time frame is, but it's happening.
Sure.
It's happening faster than we think, right? I mean, I think the area I'm already seeing it in is things like um, doing like marketing insights and things like that, right? So thinking about okay, how do I today we pay companies like a lot of money to go out and get marketing insights and give us reports and tell us what the customers want. Web scraping and things like that, looking at reviews and all that. I mean, AI can do that, instantly. We can get our own AI and it's something we can do today and go eliminate, expense of, external companies to go do this, which, I mean, it might make folks mad that are out there that, might be taking their job, but we're going to have to shift the way we think about work, and we're going to be doing different types of work in the future, I think, is what I think, Troy.
Sure. I even just looking at my small world of product development and designing product, um, there's going to be tools coming in like anytime where it just takes some of the mundane things that we do, adding
Sure.
draft bounds to parts to make them manufacturable and things like that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
2D drawing stuff. And yeah, that's good. We won't be doing that anymore very soon, I don't think.
I think even AI, you have to input all the information, right? So as it learns, and if you put all these different product development sort of statistics and things into AI, then it's, I mean, I can see where it's going to help us like generate different concepts that we might not have thought of before. I mean, it's a little bit scary in a way because um, I just, I don't want people to get away from using kind of our own minds and thinking, right? So we
Yeah.
don't want, I think that's the downside, right? Is that we want to keep our minds sharp and we don't want to let AI do everything for us. But I do like what you said about, can we get to do some of the mundane things so we can use our minds to think about some of the more creativity. And I mean, I think that's what gets people excited about their jobs in general, whether it's product development or some other type of job as well, right? Is to you get excited about being creative and doing things different. Doing mundane things. Nobody, I don't think that excites. I don't believe it does. I don't think that excites anyone, right? I mean, we want variety. It's the spice of life, so to say, right? You want to do things different so you can learn and evolve and become a better you.
Yeah. I totally agree. Who knows what'll come of it, but I really hope it becomes a tool that we get to use and not just a replacement for us using our brains and being creative and and those kinds of things.
Yeah, we don't want to become. If you remember the movie Idiocracy, right? My wife and I always joke about that. Where we stop thinking, and then that's not
Yeah.
what we want, right? We want to evolve into better thinkers, not letting someone else do all the thinking for us, right?
Yeah. So reflecting on all the challenges that you've seen and the successes you've encountered developing products, what words of wisdom would you share with someone looking to make a significant impact in the product development world?
I think it's probably it's alludes to something I said earlier, but I think don't let perfect get in the way of good as technical folks and engineers, right? We focus on what does the customer really want, and change as little as possible is needed to affect that change, right? So that will get you, I think, the best result over time. Although, again, as engineers, we like to change everything, and we also like to. I use this analogy a lot. We try to make the round circle more round, right? Once it's round, once it's round, we stop engineering it, right? So there comes a point when you get the product good enough, and in the end, what I've learned is when you put a product out there and you think it's perfect, it's not, because people are going to have feedback and they're going to want things changed anyway. So you're almost better off getting it out there faster, getting the input. Us assuming, of course, you get your quality right and everything. You don't want quality spills and things like that. You don't want to be doing that. You don't want to get things out so fast you're like not looking at quality, but get the products out there, get the feedback and evolve your products, and always be thinking about, okay, how can I make it better, experience for the customer, right? Because nowadays with all and you probably do the same thing. I look at ratings and I read all these reviews, and people are so hypercritical. There's so much information out there. You got to be ready to make changes. You got to be ready to evolve. You can't just think because you put something out it's just done, it's perfect. You got to be able to think about, okay, how can I make this better? But you're not going to get that feedback until you get it out there. So if you wait all this time to get the product out, then you're missing all that feedback.
Sure. No, that's good advice. Yeah, this has been great. Is there anything else you want to mention or product development in general?
I don't believe so. I really appreciate our conversation. I think this has been, a great discussion.
Yeah, this has been awesome. I normally would ask where people could go see this product, but it sounds like the best place would probably be like Homes or Lowe's or Home Depot or something like that, right?
Yeah. For this one in particular, yeah, you could look at your home stores, and you're going to see the product on shelf.
Okay, awesome. Well, I really appreciate you doing this, Scott.
Well, thank you, Trey. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for.
To learn more about Impulse and how we might be able to help you, visit impulseproductdevelopment.com.